Hi, this is Chris Palomino from Los Angeles, California, and you're listening to Two Broads Talking Politics.
Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm doing a rare in-person interview today with Robert Emmons Jr., who is running for Congress in the 1st District of Illinois. Hi, Robert.
Hey, Kelly. Thanks so much for having us today.
Yeah, so this is pretty exciting to actually get to interview a neighbor. We are currently sitting in the 2nd District of Illinois, but if we look out the window right next to us, we can see the 1st District, so we're pretty close.
It's beautiful over there, that 1st District. It's so nice.
Yeah, and I am very familiar with the 1st District, have lived there, work in the 1st District, so it's, other than my home district,
Yeah.
the one I think I know the best. So, Robert, could we start by just tell me about your background and why you decided to run for Congress?
Absolutely. In terms of my background, I call myself a social innovator, which doesn't mean much in America, but internationally, essentially what a social innovator does is it takes a group of problems and works with a group of people to solve those problems by using the innovative design thinking model. It starts off with defining the problem, going up to research, and all the way up until actual implementation and evaluation of the programs. So that's what I did with the Obama Foundation, and that's also what I did with this nonprofit named One Goal, which is a national college access and persistence organization dedicated to helping low-income students like myself at that time get into college. And then what's most important is actually persisting throughout college. And then outside of being a social innovator directly, I call myself a gun violence prevention advocate. And what I mean by that is not necessarily going to take away everybody's guns, but to focus on preventing gun violence. Because this issue matters deeply to me because I've lost friends to gun violence, and my story has become all too familiar with many people in the district. And what I'm advocating for throughout this campaign is for us to say bold and courageous things like we're going to end gun violence within our lifetime. Think about how many more lives we can save when we have leaders that actually believe that it's possible to end gun violence. So that's why I'm running.
All right. And so tell me a little bit. I know a lot about the 1st District of Illinois, but not all of our listeners do. So just a little bit about the district, where it's located, and kind of what the concerns are of the people in the district.
Absolutely. First of all, this district, the 1st District specifically, is a very historic district. This is a district that Mayor Harold Washington got his political start as the representative of the district. This is a district in which Barack Obama ran in 20 years ago. So the district is a lot of the Chicago South Side, and it stretches all the way southwest going towards Joliet. So some of the neighborhoods that it includes are Bronzeville, Hyde Park, Auburn Gresham, Chatham, parts of Roseland and Inglewood, going all the way southwest towards like Tinley Park, Oak Lawn, Manhattan, New Lenox. So it's a very large district. There's about 711,000 residents with a bunch of different interests. As many parts of the country have a bunch of different interests, but overwhelmingly, what people want to see is a reduction of crime and an increase in being able to get jobs and have access to upward mobility. And where I'm from Auburn Gresham, the biggest issue is gun violence, was what I believe. But I think we need to focus on solving gun violence at its root causes. And then that's how you marry all of the different issues together, and then they converge to gun violence. So that's access to mental health care. That's reforming the way our schools are even funded. Because if you look at the way the schools are currently funded, it's based off of housing taxes. And if you're from a poor area, then your school's going to be underfunded. And I think that's an injustice. And back to mental health care. As we look in this country to expanding healthcare, we need to also make sure that we're expanding mental health care, because as we see our young people are traumatized, and they need to have access to the care that they need so that they can go to school and perform to the capacity that their brains are already developed. Because as we know, our young people are some of the smartest in the entire planet. They just need that opportunity to do so. We need to invest in environmental justice because we know what lead in our drinking water does to the minds of our young people. So there are a bunch of different issues that are married to gun violence, and they also, the solutions to them have to also be solved by addressing some of those other issues that I just named.
So the first district right now is represented by a Democrat. He hasn't yet said whether he's running or retiring next time. Why did you choose to step into a race where you're potentially running in a primary against an incumbent?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I get that question so often as to why am I running? Why now? Mm-hmm. When I think about a lot of the issues that face our country, some of our most pressing, like our criminal justice system and gun violence and our young people not being able to graduate college. And if they do graduate from college, they're coming out with massive amounts of student loan debt. A lot of these issues disproportionately affect young Black men under the age of 30. Then when I looked at our elected officials in Washington, no one really fit that demographic. So I think we're missing a key voice in Congress, and we need that voice to advocate for some of the most vulnerable communities in our country, and allow that voice to say courageous things and advocate for those courageous things from a lens of being able to truly understand the experiences of that group.
There's been some talk about the D+28 trying to sort of put the emphasis on incumbents instead of challengers. So what do you see as sort of what you'll need to do to get your voice out there and to run if the D+28 is focusing on the incumbents? What is the path for a challenger to take?
Yeah. The beauty of what's going on around the country is organizing is starting to take having a bigger role in politics. So what we're doing in my campaign, for example, is we've invested in making sure that almost everybody in our campaign is an organizer. For example, we brought on 3 March for Our Lives organizers for our campaign because they have proven to be able to galvanize groups of people and push us towards justice and push us towards freedom. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to organize, we're going to galvanize, and we're going to uplift the entire community. Our campaign mantra is "We are the solution," and then we end it with "Together," which means that our communities aren't starting off on blank slates, nor is there one particular person that's going to solve all our problems. We're only going to solve our problems when we're working together to push for justice and freedom for everybody.
I can see how young you are. The listeners maybe can't. But I believe if you were elected, you'd be the youngest member of Congress, yes, younger even than AOC. So talk to me a little bit. You mentioned that we don't have the voices of young Black men in Congress, but talk to me a little bit about sort of the perspective that you'd bring and how you think you have prepared to do this job. Yeah.
The perspective I bring as a Black man, as a young Black man, is proximity to the issues themselves. Like when I talk about gun violence, I'm talking about it because I've gone through it. I've lost best friends to gun violence. When I talk about getting sick and going into debt because you got sick, and your whole life kind of being derailed, I've experienced it myself. When I talk about the criminal justice system, I have friends in the criminal justice system right now. So I'm coming at it from a different lens than what some other folks in Congress, even some of the great ones that are champions, coming at it from a different place because I live it, I go through it, and these are my friends. And when I get to Congress, I'm not going to change at all. I'm going to bring those stories of my friends to Congress, and I'm also going to tap into my own experiences and make sure that I'm being a voice for that vulnerable community. Because we know when we uplift that vulnerable community, the entire society does better. So that's what I'm going to bring to the table is a true voice that won't change, that won't be altered, is going to fight like hell to make sure that my friends and people like you and I could live in a life free from fear of being shot by a gun, free from feeling like if you get sick, your whole life's gonna be derailed. That's what I'm fighting for.
Yeah. And so talk to me about some of the experiences. You mentioned being in being an Obama fellow. Talk to me about some of the other things that you've done. I know you've done some traveling and how those things really prepare you for this, what's really a very big job, being a congressman.
Absolutely. So I've been fighting for a lot of different issues, even throughout my college advocacy days. I worked briefly with Senator Dick Durbin and fighting for the increase in the national minimum wage. I worked for an organization named Next Generation Climate, working in environmental justice. Of course, working in the gun violence prevention space with Generation Progress. I've done a lot of work in the past in terms of advocacy, but it wasn't until my best friend was shot and killed that a new fire kind of developed in my stomach. And since then, my entire life has been about not just advocating for these things, but being champions for these things. And I think that's what has prepared me for running for Congress. And more importantly, it's what's going to prepare me to actually win this election, and be a voice to our people. And I think more so than the litany of resume things that I can list off it's that heart that is what prepared me for Congress.
So I'm going to ask this because I've heard you tell this story before, but your family has a personal experience with the current president, Trump. Could you tell a little bit about that story?
Absolutely. And I'm starting to get this question more and more often. I might prepare a little bit more for it next time. Yeah, so my family's originally from Chicago, same house that I ended up growing up in after we moved back. But my dad actually was recruited to go work in Atlantic City as a pastry chef in Donald Trump's Taj Mahal. And at the Taj Mahal, my dad experienced tons of inequities while there. And it's, for me, at least in hindsight, what it taught me is that there's a huge wealth disparity. And on one end, you have a billionaire who owns the casino. On the other end, you have an employee that works 60 hours a week, but his family is struggling to make ends meet. In many, many ways, that has shaped me into the person I am today, by seeing that growth and disparity in income and overall financial stability. It prepared me for what I'm doing now, because we want to end that. We want to make sure that everyone is doing well, and no one has to make a decision on whether or not they're going to pay for gas or food. Sometimes my family had to make that decision. So that's what we're going to fight against when we get to Congress.
So this is a very urban district. Of all the districts in the country, it's one of the very most urban districts. We've talked about some of them, but what do you think are the kinds of things that are challenges that urban districts in particular people may not be focusing on as much? You know, we hear a lot about whether we can reach rural districts, whether we can reach rural voters, and people sometimes worry that Democrats, for instance, are taking urban voters sort of for granted. So what are some of the real challenges for urban districts that really need more of a voice in Congress?
What I keep hearing outside of gun violence being the very top issue, I think when you go a little bit below just gun violence, you look at why someone would turn to a gun. And in many cases, it's because they don't have a job. And that's what we hear a lot of, is that there's not access to good paying jobs that would allow for someone to make a decent living wage. And we need to invest in small businesses. We need to invest in job training. We need to invest in making sure our young people can get into college. And then more importantly, make sure that we're providing them enough resources for them to graduate college and then not coming out with so much student debt that they're still in poverty, like me, like I was when I first graduated from college. I graduated with $50,000 in student loan debt. Which results in about $500 per month in student loan payments. If I wasn't fortunate enough to be able to have a good paying job, I would have still been in poverty, even if I was making $35,000 a year, because the amount of money coming out of my bank account just for student debt would have resulted in me being in poverty, which I think is an injustice. So I'd say all that to say that we need to invest in good paying jobs so that folks can make a decent living wage and live with dignity, and not go into more debt just because they're poor. The former President Barack Obama, he says it best. He says to be poor is extremely expensive. And couldn't be any more true than what it's like living in some of the urban parts of the first district. It's extremely, extremely expensive to be poor.
So you said that your campaign is going to be mostly organizers. So this will mean a lot of talking to people, I'm sure. As you're talking to people even now, are people thinking about Congress? Are people thinking about congressional races? Do they even know what district they live in? Or are their concerns much more sort of immediate and urgent? And, what are they saying to you sort of as you're talking to them?
What I'm learning, and as a first-time quote-unquote politician, and what I've learned as a public servant is people just want to be heard. Beyond politics and which level of government you're running for, people just want their voices to be respected, honored, and they want someone who understands what they're going through. And they also want someone who doesn't look at them as less than. They want someone who looks at them and knows that in order for me, the politician, to get any of the things I'm saying I want to get done, is going to require each and every one of us actively working together. And that's what I'm hearing all around. People have great ideas, and there's this spirit that's culminating and all across the country, and it's the spirit of tenacity and resilience and this hopefulness that I would have thought that would have started to die down by now, but it's only increasing. And more folks are jumping into the process and being included in that fight for justice. So
you're brand new to this process of running for Congress, and just declared fairly recently. The election's still a fair amount of time away, although, of course, the primary is less than a year away. So one of the things that we hear from candidates often is how much money they need to raise just to be able to compete in races, and how much of a process it is to raise that money. Can you talk a little bit about sort of that, what that's like as a first-time candidate, getting into that, raising the money, and your thoughts then on the role of money in politics and what it's doing to our political sphere?
Yeah. The role of money in politics, at least for me as a first-time candidate, has somewhat been discouraging. And on one end, because you have to spend about 70% of your time on the phone, calling folks asking for money. But on the flip side, and the way we've planned and decided to fundraise is very grassroots oriented. And that's talking to small dollar donors and teaching them about your campaign and ways that they can get involved. That's been the encouraging part about money in politics is focusing on those small dollars. However, in a federal election in which you have to raise millions of dollars in order to remain a viable campaign, it gets really difficult to sustain off of simply small dollars. And that's when the call time comes back into play. And that's time that you can't spend directly in the district listening to people. So overall, what I think we have to move towards is a more democratic way of financing campaigns, so that candidates are more accountable to the people in the district than they are to people outside of the district, and in some cases calling around asking for money, because we need voices in Congress and in all branches of government, not just Congress, and all levels of government, not just federally. We need people that are actually listening to the people, getting ideas and being proximate to the issues, not so much just focused on just getting the money for the next election. And maybe in that way, if we can focus more on proximity to the issues and being accessible to the people, we can have more representative government. So hopefully throughout this campaign, we figure out the secret sauce for fundraising, so we can spend a little bit more time on the ground, hearing people's stories, and really investing our energy in allowing our ideas to be developed in a participatory fashion. But yeah.
Yeah, that's great. For people who aren't as familiar with campaigns, what are some of the things that that money goes toward in campaigns? Like, why do you need to raise so much money to run for office? And it's true, everyone does. But what are some of the ways that campaigns spend money?
Yeah, so staffing is a big part of all campaigns. As a candidate, I like to, I'm more of the product. And as the campaign staff, they're more of the folks that keep the product moving. So you have to invest in your people. You have to at least attempt to pay them so that they can live. So that's one big thing is the staffing. Another big thing is getting votes costs money. So each voter has there's not a price tag on that voter, but ultimately, in order to engage with that voter, there's a price per interaction. So you have to factor that in, and then you think about literature. How do you even let folks know about your campaign and your vision for the district? And office supplies and websites and photos and videos. All these things cost a lot of money. Again, it's the most encouraging thing about this campaign as it pertains to fundraising are the small dollars that come through. I was speaking to one of my friends a few months ago who donated $10 to our campaign, and then she texted me and she was like, "I'm so sorry, I was only able to donate $10." And I had to let her know like how thankful I was for that $10 because it meant a lot to me just because I knew she didn't have much, but she believed in something much bigger. And I knew that $10 wasn't going towards just me. That was going towards what she believed in. And it was going towards her. She believed in that her $10 was just as valuable as someone else's $2,000 donation. So I had to make sure she knew how valuable that was and what she was given to.
If people who are listening want to help your campaign, they like what they're hearing, what are some ways that they can help out? Absolutely.
Thanks for asking. They can go to our website. So our website is Robert, that's my first name, Emmons, EMMONS.org. You can also follow us on Facebook. My Facebook, I guess my username is Robert Emmons Jr. And then on Twitter, it's R+28
All right. Excellent. We'll put links up on our website for those as well so that people can find them. Robert, thank you so much for stopping by my house. This is excellent.
Thank you.
And talking to me. And thank you for running. I had been joking about running in the 1st District, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to move down the street to actually live in the 1st. So I'm glad that you're running.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Today I am on with Chris Rowe, who is running for Congress in the Tennessee 1st District. Hi, Chris.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So could we start with just some background? Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and why you're running for Congress?
Yeah, sure. And I'll do my best to boil down the why to as short an answer as I can, but it's a little bit more complicated than just one thing. But myself, I am a 6-year veteran of the U.S. Air Force. I served both stateside and in Italy, and finished that up back in 2014, and then went from there, transitioned back into the civilian world, where I went to college at Lewis University up in Illinois, or in the outskirts of Chicago. I actually just graduated there last May with a computer information systems and information security degree. To get a little bit to the why I'm running, as I'm sure many of your listeners and probably you as well, have been watching politics for pretty much my entire adult life and not been especially happy with the way I've seen things going. It's been a whole lot of folks that just aren't quite shooting straight with their policies and not really looking out for the best interest of the public and just general selfish and not helpful behavior from our elected representatives who are supposed to be there to serve us. And I was never especially thrilled with it, but I decided to tell myself for a long time, I would sit there and wait for what I felt like was the best candidate to finally show up and somebody that I could really throw my support behind. But things kept getting worse and worse, and that candidate just never showed up. And really kind of the final deciding factor for when I was going to jump into politics myself was when I came here for a visit late last year. I stopped by on a vacation from work, and it was a little bit of a surprise visit for my family. And I went to visit my father at work. And when I found him, I was not prepared for what I saw. It was as much a surprise for me as it was for my family. My father turned around, and he was walking with a cane, and he was in so much pain that it had started developing psychological symptoms. He had a pretty serious stutter and just had a difficult time talking. And that was really painful for me to see. I mean, he's not even 60 years old yet, and he's probably going to be on a cane the rest of his life. And it was all because of just complications from medical issues that he couldn't get treated because he couldn't get coverage. And that's thanks in no small part to a lot of our elected representatives who've gone out of their way to avoid reforming our medical system. So that weighed really heavily on me when I went back from my vacation, and it wasn't long after that I had everything packed into a truck and moved back down here to be with him and take care of him and my mother. And I started the process to sign up and be the perfect candidate that I kept waiting for.
I'm sorry to hear about your father, but that makes a lot of sense as something to inspire you. Can you tell me a little bit about the 1st District of Tennessee, sort of what part of Tennessee is this, and tell us a little bit about just the district.
So the 1st District in Tennessee, it's pretty much the northeast corner, bordering like Virginia and North Carolina. And it covers a little ways in that direction, but it's that corner, and it covers all of the Tri-Cities area and about as far southwest as Morristown, I believe. And things kind of go in a little bit of a semicircle there. It's not very clean because, congressional district. Anyway, the district itself, it's very heavily Republican. It has been for a very, very long time. It's currently rated at R+28, and it really hasn't moved very far in either direction for a very, very long time. If I win, it will be the first Democrat to hold the seat in over a century. So it would be a pretty big deal. But regardless of what the environment looks like, I feel like it's an important fight to fight on all fronts, especially with how much misinformation we have going around and how much people just want to make us as Democrats seem like the bad guys. And that's just not the case. The way I look at it, and I spent a long time really grappling with what I wanted to do politically and where I found myself. But what it came down to for me was the Republican Party tends to appease their base by taking things away from other people just to make their constituents feel like they're better than those people. But the Democratic Party, they focus their efforts on giving more to everyone rather than taking something away to make people feel better.
Have you been, I know it's early in the campaign, have you been out talking to residents of the district? What are the kinds of things you're hearing from them about their concerns?
I've talked to some of them, and I get out as much as I can and involve myself in smaller community events, especially like you said, as early as it is. There's not a whole lot of hardcore campaigning going on, but I'm still involving myself in the community. And what I'm hearing really depends heavily on who I'm talking to. Obviously, well, I guess not so obviously given how far we are from the border, but immigration is a big issue around here. And there's a whole lot of, well, we need to make sure the border's secure and we need that wall so that we can take care of ourselves and this and that. But I don't really know that there's a whole lot that I'm going to be able to do to convince them that we don't need that wall. And I'm not entirely certain what a good way to address that is going to be. I've worked on it, and I ask people, what is it that illegal immigrants have done which has affected you personally, and how can I help there? Because the wall isn't the answer, and it's been proven by research over and over that the wall isn't the answer. So what can I do that will improve your life? And I've yet to run into a solid, well-reasoned answer there. And my incumbent actually has somebody that tends to follow him around to his events and relay the story of his daughter, who was a victim of a drug driver who was also an undocumented immigrant. And that's a really complicated issue for me to approach. Obviously, the sentiment is that he shouldn't have been in the country to begin with. So this guy's daughter should be alive still. And that's true to an extent. He broke our laws and was in our country illegally. However, the bigger problem was the illegal drunken driving, because if he wasn't driving under the influence, there wouldn't have been a wreck in the first place. So, I mean, we could what if all day, but the fact of the matter is, it's an emotional argument. It's not one based in logic.
What are some of the issues that you would like to focus on instead that are really driving you and your campaign?
Obviously, based on what got me into this in the first place, the number one thing that I've based my campaign on has been healthcare reform and making sure that we get a plan that covers everyone, period. Because the current system, it's just not working. We're allowing big companies to get rich on the backs of other people who just suffer, and we're allowing and perpetuating a system of extortion right now, and that's the long and the short of it. But beyond healthcare, I believe that it's important that we get our education system fixed and fully fund traditional public education, not private schools or religious schools or anything like that, because we've seen that they don't work and their money sinks, and they don't have the kinds of regulations that public schools do, and they tend to underpay their teachers, and the list just goes on for reasons why we don't need to worry about private schools. We need to fix public schools. And then the last one, and really the biggest challenge that the world right now is facing, is environmental policy. I think it's important that we stop subsidizing fossil fuels and things of that nature, and we start reinvesting in green energy, and we start fixing our infrastructure to make it more environmentally friendly, and we start fixing things so that we actually leave a planet for our children and grandchildren to inherit, rather than causing the extinction of the human species.
So I know that you're a veteran, and you've said that you're in favor of the Second Amendment, but would like to see more common sense gun reforms. Could you talk a little bit about that dynamic of being someone who's trained on firearms and supports the right of people to own guns, but also thinks that we need some reforms?
Sure. And that's actually probably been the issue that's been most contentious for me with Democrats in the area, just because part of my belief on that is that we don't need further gun bans. I know a lot of people are pushing really hard for an assault weapons ban, but I believe that describing some guns as assault weapons is providing a meaningless distinction where there's not one. I mean, they all fire bullets, they all kill people. That's literally what a gun was created for, was causing damage, and marking one semi-automatic firearm different from another isn't going to fix the problem. What will fix the problem, however, is passing legislation like we've seen in a lot of other states, like red flag laws and universal background checks, including on private sales, and mental health screenings and things like that, things that can actually identify the problem people, because that's what has been our issue historically. I mean, just about every mass shooting we've had recently, there have been people who were concerned about it beforehand. There have been signs and things that we could and should have picked up on, which we just didn't, because we either didn't have the laws in place to address it properly, or we just didn't have people who cared, or any number of other problems. But in 100% of shooting incidents, there is a person involved that has gone away from responsible gun ownership into an area of willfully breaking the law, really.
What are some of the ways, you mentioned this is an R+28 district, and, it's going to be a pretty tough road. But what are some of the things that you think you can do to sort of reach Democrats, to reach people who may be, independents or maybe willing to vote for a Democrat? What are some of the ways you envision your campaign moving forward so that you're able to flip as many votes as possible?
Well, I am working hard to flip votes and get out there and interact with a lot of the people who really haven't had a chance to talk to Democrats and learn about our values. They learn about, really they learn about us from the news. And we all know that there's a significant amount of bias in the news, and they hear about how we're evil socialists and we want to take everything from them and give it to undocumented immigrants and things like that. But the thing of it is, what it really comes down to is they're really not that different from us for the most part. And when you actually have a chance to sit down and interact with them face to face, it's a lot easier to just have a calm discussion with them and make it clear that this and this and this is what you want to do. Like, I want to make sure that people have health care. I want to make sure that our children have an education and they can actually have a solid opportunity to get a well-paying job when they grow up. I want to make sure that we leave our environment in decent enough shape that our children have a planet when they grow up. And I mean, when you sit down and just talk to them about really the basic policies that you espouse, it's a lot easier to win support that way than to try and make it about Democrats versus Republicans or about me versus you or anything like that. I've approached them calmly and as a friend rather than as an adversary. But equally important to that, I think flipping this district involves getting a lot of the younger folks more active and interested in politics, because we have huge voter blocks here that just aren't really tapped at all, be it because of difficulty registering or because of just lack of interest in the political system or anything like that. When we start approaching them and addressing what's at stake if we don't start working for our own future, I believe that we can get them active and interested and really start swelling up some of the voting numbers and getting more folks on board with helping make Tennessee a better place.
I read somewhere that the incumbent, Representative Rowe, spelled differently than you spell your last name, actually delivered you when you were born.
Yes, that is correct.
So I don't know exactly how old you are, exactly how old he is, but I assume that makes him at least a fair bit older than you. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that sort of bringing new, younger energy into Congress.
Like I said, I think that that's hugely important, especially around here, because so many people in this area are Trump supporters, not because they feel like Trump was the greatest thing since sliced bread, but because they feel like so many politicians are just droll and boring and don't bring any amount of energy or care to the position. So we have these folks that'll stand up on the debate stage and it's just two guys using the same boring speeches that they've heard forever. And they already know that the one guy that they've been voting for is just going to keep doing what he's doing, and they haven't seen any significant, negative impacts from it, and they're okay with that. So they just vote for what they know. But they just get tired of seeing the same boring politician speech that they always get from everybody, and it's time that, like you said, we do bring some youth and energy into it and try to help people understand that politics shouldn't be just two old folks standing on a stage arguing back and forth. It should be a discussion that involves everybody, young, old, and in between. And until we get to a point where people really start seeing some younger folks out there and believing that younger folks are there and ready to make a change, I don't think we're going to get anywhere.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure we talk about?
The only thing that I can think of beyond that is, I guess, really that we need to start bringing some integrity back to politics as a whole. People have gotten so used to politicians lie. All politicians lie. You can ask anybody anywhere, and do politicians lie? And the answer is yes. It doesn't matter. That if there's one thing that we can unite everyone in agreement on, it is politicians lie, and that's a problem. I think it's time that we start renewing the value of integrity and honesty in our political system, and more importantly, openness. Phil Rowe has this whole system built up around him in this area, which is made for a very, very slanted political discussion. But he puts out this information that, when you look at it just right, yeah, it's kind of true, but it makes people believe that a lot of these things that I believe in, a lot of the policies that would really help folks, would be detrimental to them and would also benefit the people that they dislike. And that's really problematic, because it reinforces the thought that, well, he's telling me the truth on this policy, and it's got to be bad because, we've elected him this many times. And until we can start bringing back the value of, like I said, full truth, open, honest communication of what a policy is going to do, we'll end up with more nuggets like H.R. 1 is bad because it abridges some people's right to a freedom of speech. And that was, on its face, one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard, and it came directly from Phil Rowe's mouth. And what he meant when he said that was that we would be overturning Citizens United and abridging the right of companies as people to use money as speech. So it would cut off some of his big donors, is the point. And it was just wild to me how many people immediately went, yeah, that makes sense. Good job. Thanks for voting for that. Or thanks for voting against that, rather.
If our listeners would like to help out your campaign, how can they do that?
Actually, just this week, we put up a brand spanking new website, fully redesigned, thanks to Shepherd Media Services, a local Johnson City company. And that is chrisroweforcongress.com. Or they can reach out to me via Twitter at chrisfortn1. And I am very responsive to anybody. I love, especially folks that want to get involved and help with the campaign, but I occasionally just get random questions. At one point, I had a guy send me a message via the campaign website and ask what my MOS was in the Air Force. And I was like, well, to be clear, we didn't have MOSs, we had AFSCs, and I got into a discussion with him about what I did in the Air Force. But we do have a full contact page there. If anybody wants to invite me to events, if anybody wants to help me plan events, it is all included on the webpage, and I am more than happy to talk or meet with anybody who is involved or interested in getting involved in the political process.
All right, excellent. We'll put links up to that on our website so people can find you.
All right, thank you very much.
So, Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today, and thank you for stepping up and running. I think it's so important that people run, even in these districts that seem really difficult, like a long road, but I think it's great that you're running, and I wish you all the luck.
Thank you very much, and I agree it's very important to run. I mean, if nobody ever tries, we're never going to make any progress, and things are just going to get worse. So it needs to happen. But thank you guys for having me.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Wethlin and was created for use by this podcast.